Philip, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Very good, very good. So, what led to your initial interest in Gladio? Were you living in Italy as a younger man during the years of lead?
Yes, I've had a base in Italy for more than 50 years. So I came here with my parents when I was 9 years old. My father worked at the Food and Agriculture Organization here of the United Nations, and I went to boarding school and then university in England, and I came over here for the holidays while a lot of things were going on which I wasn't really aware of. My family lived in a modern suburb of Rome called EUR, and a lot of the time that I was staying with them, I wouldn't necessarily even go into the centre of Rome. So I was very young at that stage and not particularly interested in the topics that would interest me later. But also I was living in a sort of another environment where I think when left-wing protests were at their height at a particular period in the 1970s, more or less every Saturday, large crowds would congregate in the centre of Rome, and there'd be violence, and the place would be full of tear gas, and there'd be fighting with the police. But I wouldn't be aware of that because I would be in school in the UK or
I see.
you are blithely unaware.
Right, right, right. So you're how old right now? May I ask?
I'm 63.
Ah, we're the same age. So we lived through some very interesting decades, I think.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Um,
right.
I thought I might begin by asking about the strategy of tension. What do you know what the origins are of the strategy of tension, and who first coined the term? Do you have any idea?
I think the term was first coined in an article in the Observer. It may have been Leslie Feiner who wrote the article for the Observer, but I think it was possibly the Observer first coined the term to describe the particularly right-wing terrorism and the coup plots and the terrorist bombings that had the effect of shoring up the Christian Democrat dominated governments and ensuring that there was no sort of slippage into a left-wing or communist
Right.
government.
Right, and you also call it you refer to it as an action of destabilizing in order to stabilize. Yes,
Yes, yes, I think that sums it up
that sums it up. Yeah.
fairly accurately. That was what was going on.
In 1965, the Alberto Palio Institute held a 3-day conference in Rome, quote, branded as the memento zero of the strategy of tension, and endorsed the view that the Third World War is already underway. What is the significance of the historical significance of this meeting, and what came out of it over the years? What influence did it have?
Yes, I think it sort of laid the theoretical groundwork for what came afterwards, and the variety of people attending was very significant as well. You had representatives of the military and the secret services, but also young right-wing militants, and a very strong representation of extreme right-wing opinion among the participants and the speakers. So I think it was an important moment in the sort of worlds that probably came together subsequently to do what they felt was needed to sort of take stock and decide that something, that they needed to do something, that their Western system in their eyes was under assault, sort of under permanent assault from communism in all sorts of forms and guises, and therefore they needed to up their game and respond in kind to the kind of assault that they felt that they were being subjected to.
Maybe you could just briefly say, what was so special, for someone who doesn't know anything about this, what was so special about post-war Italy that it attracted so much covert action and monkey business like this?
Well, I think Italy was, Italy's position made it a sort of fault line for conflict in multiple ways. For one thing, clearly they'd been on the losing side in the war, and they were governed immediately afterwards by the Allied Government Commission dominated by the United States, and also with the British playing an important role after the end of the war. Italy itself had been divided because, whereas Mussolini, when he was firmly in control, had enormous support from the people, and the resistance was a very minority activity to be involved in. In the latter stages, when there was the armistice and the Italian government effectively changed sides, and Mussolini had his last stand, Republic of Salò in the north, under the complete control of the Germans. Then many more Italians became involved in the resistance and joined the partisans and fought in the latter stages against fascism. So fault line within Italy that more or less everybody had gone along with him for a long time, with a very small minority resisting from the very beginning, and then larger numbers, particularly members of the Communist Party, being a strong component of the anti-fascist resistance. Sort of change of tide in the war, more and more people joining the winning side at the end. So you had a very bitter civil war in the last stages, and atrocities committed by the fascists against anti-fascist Italians and Italian civilians, and then also reprisals against fascists after the war. So a very bitter atmosphere in Italy as the conflict came to an end. And then, of course, very quickly, or almost immediately, and maybe even before the hot war finished in the Second World War, there was this realignment for what was going to become the Cold War, and Italy's strategic position in the Mediterranean, because of the fact that the communists had been leading players in the resistance in the latter stages of the war, and the fact that in the post-war era, particularly in the 1970s, the Italian Communist Party became the largest communist in the West. That was a major source of worry for the Western system, basically. And there were other fault lines. The presence of the Vatican, for example, as a major anti-communist force, a global presence, global interests, with its representatives suffering persecution behind the Iron Curtain, and itself divided to some extent, the Catholic Church divided with liberation theology and work of priests, and as a component of the Church sympathetic to left-wing causes, but probably at the highest levels in the Vatican, some very conservative people who would find it natural to be allied with the United States and working with the CIA, for example, to combat communism. And then the other area of conflict and division for Italy was how to align itself in relation to the Middle East. It was a country that didn't have adequate oil supplies of its own, so it was dependent on oil imported from Arab oil-producing countries. And there was also concern that Italy and the Vatican needed for Italy to have good relations with those countries, because there's a lot of concern for Christian minorities living in Islamic-dominated countries. And then the other side was sympathy with Israel and close intelligence ties and arms trading with Israel. So there was this conflict, unresolved conflict. We want to be friends with everybody, and so we'll maybe be selling arms under the table to the PLO, but at the same time we'll be helping Israel and collaborating with Mossad. So a tricky balancing act, and I think the Italian military intelligence service was very divided on this issue as well. There was a faction that was in favor of Israel, and there was a faction that supported the Palestinian cause and wanted good relations with the Arab world.
Very complex situation.
Indeed, yes.
You brought up the Vatican, so I'm going to jump ahead to a question I had for you at the very end. I think this would be a good point to talk about it. For me, reading through all this, the Gladio material, what really emerges as a portrait is that it seems very clear now that from 1945 to 1990, the Cold War period, there was really a worldwide covert war against the left, something we don't hear about in school. And in The Last Supper, you refer to, quote, an undeclared global war, and discuss the banking mechanisms at work behind it. These include the Vatican Bank, called the IOR, run by Archbishop Marcinkus, which supported murderous right-wing regimes in Latin America. And then banks run by Propagandae Due members Michel Sindona and Roberto Calvi, such as the Banco Ambrosiano, which had direct ties to the Vatican. Then you include this incredible quote. You say Carlo Bordoni, a money trader, testified that P2 member Sindona was involved in financial operations in Uruguay, Chile, Argentina, Taiwan, and Greece. And in Greece, Sindona was active in financing the regime of the colonels, which is another Gladio operation. What role did these financial institutions linked to the Vatican very strongly play in this global war on the left?
Well, I think he provided a very useful conduit for the transfer of funds needed to support the right-wing causes that were in conflict with communism. The IOR itself, by its very nature, was had a sort of global reach and was intended to support Catholic institutions and religious orders and monasteries and convents and Catholic activities around the globe. But they also needed to be able to do that discreetly, because there would be parts of the world where the Catholic activities might be sensitive or subject to persecution, for example, in Islamic states or at this time in countries behind the Iron Curtain. So the mechanism was there to transfer money discreetly around the globe, and if there was a feeling that the right thing to do was to support the kind of activities that the CIA was involved in, combating communism around the globe, it was sort of a natural alliance between these institutions, particularly with an American of Lithuanian descent, like Marcinkus, in charge of the Vatican Bank. He would have an actual affinity with his fellow countrymen in the United States, but even more sensitivity to the plight of Catholics who grew behind in Eastern Europe and in his own country of Lithuania. So he was sort of a natural for the role of CIA ally and assistant in this global battle. And in the case of Roberto Calvi and the Banco Ambrosiano, one of the theories as to why the bank went bankrupt was that they had given too much money to the Solidarity trade union in Poland, and there was therefore this big hole in the bank's finances. And one of the theories behind Calvi's murder, which left him hanging from scaffolding under Blackfriars Bridge in London, was that some of this money had been was being laundered on behalf of the Mafia and possibly the Banda della Maliana, a crime gang in Rome. And when Calvi was unable to repay it because it had ended up supporting the workers in Poland, the anti-communist workers in Poland. These people didn't take kindly to being bilked by somebody and were consequently directly involved in his murder in London.
The Mafia does get a little touchy when it comes to money being paid back, don't they?
Yes, it's an important issue for them.
You say that evidence submitted at the Roberto Calvi murder trial shows that Calvi and Archbishop Marcinkus were both, quote, involved in laundering drug money for Cosa Nostra, taking over a role that had previously belonged to Michel Sindona, whom you call a Mafia-linked murderer. Strange bedfellows with the Vatican. So, and then you also include, I found this really fascinating, you include some of the testimony of Richard Bernecka, who says that the CIA sold illegal drugs to the Mafia, and the subsequent money laundering may have intersected with the Vatican Bank and the banks controlled by the P2 members Calvi and Sindona. I believe you draw that latter conclusion. So am I correct in understanding all this, that some of these laundered funds, which went through Vatican banks, were then channeled to Licio Gelli's secret Masonic lodge, Propaganda Dui, to then pay for terrorism that killed ordinary citizens? Is that correct?
I think it's a fair assumption that happened. I don't think we can actually trace concrete examples of it and give instances of particular sums ending up in particular hands and then being used to kill ordinary citizens on the street or on trains or railway stations in the country. One of the areas where there's a particularly strong suspicion that happened is with the Bologna railway station bombing, and that there's a strong suspicion that it happened, and there are particular money flows that it's been suggested could have been connected to that atrocity. And I know when I spoke to Roberto Calvi's son, Carlo Calvi, in Canada, it was a hypothesis that obviously was very upsetting for him to think that his father could have been involved in something like that. But it was, I think, something he was prepared to contemplate if it helped to draw the true picture of what had happened, and also helped to identify the people who were responsible for his murder. So it was something, a traumatic idea, but something that he was prepared to contemplate and discuss, and certainly that he didn't rule out as being unthinkable.
But the evidence submitted at the murder trial is pretty solid in terms of showing that the Vatican Bank laundered Mafia money, correct?
Yes, that is correct. That is something that the evidence was presented to the trial, and the judges at the various stages of it accepted that it was it was correct, that it was factually correct. So yes, it is one of the findings of those trials.
It's an amazing story. This I also found fascinating. You say that from 1969 to 1976, in elections for the Chamber of Deputies, support for the Italian Communist Party, or PCI, steadily increased. During that same period, the parabola of electoral support for the PCI was paralleled by the amount of terrorist activity in Italy. 398 attacks in 1969, 2,513 during 1979. That's just mind-blowing. It seems clear now that only the right wing could have gained from this terror, and that this violence was coordinated by Western security forces, i.e. Operation Gladio, NATO secret armies. Are we correct to assume that some of it had to have been paid for by these Vatican-linked banks?
I think it's a fair assumption that they were actively involved in this global campaign. P2 was a strongly anti-communist organization, and it had key people in control of these institutions. So it's logical to assume that their resources were available to P2 when they were needed, and and that they would have been used.
Mm.
So yes, I think it's a fair assumption.
Mm.
I think on the question of Gladio's involvement in all of this, at least in the case of Italy, I know there are a number of colleagues who believe that the official Gladio organization that was revealed by Andreotti in 1990 or whenever it was, may have been something of a smokescreen for other right-wing organizations that really did the dirty work, and that, in a sense, the official Gladio may have become a scapegoat for other people. But it's a complicated question and still sort of open for debate. But there is this suggestion that it's perhaps not correct to blame everything on the officially recognized Gladio that was set up in the immediate post-war years and had very few known members according to the official account, but that it may have been used as a smokescreen for other
Yes, I understand.
organizations.
But by the way, in the course of our discussion, when I use the word Gladio, I'm not just referring to the Italian Gladio, right? We're talking about the overall NATO Operation Gladio, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So what you just said, I actually had a question about that because, first of all, even given if that's true, the official Gladio did not bend over backwards to try to stop the unofficial right-wing terrorists, correct? The CIA did not bend over backwards to stop them either. I mean, they must have known about it, correct? We can at least assume that.
Yes, I think that is correct. That there almost certainly was a level of contact and complicity. And I think one of the big questions that is still the role of the CIA is to what extent it knew and didn't do anything to prevent things happening.
I'm sorry, Philip. You cut out on me. Could you repeat that? I didn't hear that about the CIA.
Yes, I think one of the questions that is still open is to what extent it knew about things
right.
that were going to happen and did nothing to prevent them from happening.
Right.
And to what extent it actually controlled the people who were doing these things and it encouraged them and
right.
Backed their activities. That I think is still is open for debate.
Sure.
And there may have been things may have gone down in different ways in the different episodes, but there's a constant element that tended to be that right-wing atrocities were supposed to set the stage for a right-wing coup, and for one reason or another, the coup never actually went through.
Right.
Sort of was never fully accomplished. But that the people who are doing these things, what they were aiming for was a reaction of horror and revulsion on the part of the public, atrocities nearly always initially blamed on the left or on anarchists, and creating a climate where the people would be happy to go along with a military government to
right. Yes, and what you just said about the official and unofficial, I thought this was very interesting. You say that when General Saraval first took command of Italian Gladio in 1971, he was, quote, shocked by the extremist views expressed by many of the gladiators, and he also speculated that Gladio may have been made public, quote, because it was the presentable part of the whole thing. He said, by fixing the searchlights on Gladio, the shadows behind it will grow and serve to conceal the usual suspects. Was he referring to what you were just talking about, do you think?
I think he probably was. I think he was probably a basically decent man who was uncomfortable with what was happening and was instrumental in trying to withdraw some of these weapons that had been hidden in underground caches around the country, and that when he realized or suspected what was going on, he took action to try and prevent his organization being complicit in these extreme activities. So, even within Gladio, and this sort of monolith where they were all fanatics and fully, there were some people who had deep misgivings about it, and General Serravalle was one of them.
Mm-hmm. And he was rewarded by all this, first by a probable assassination attempt. The plane he was supposed to be flying on blew up, and then he was fired after a few years, correct?
Yes, I think in many cases people who registered their objection to what was happening or became whistleblowers did in many cases meet with mysterious, suspicious deaths. Not Serravalle himself, but I think yes, his career was probably cut short. But a number of other people who had sensitive information on the coup plots and the link to the terrorist activities. They died in mysterious car accidents or apparent suicides, or a pretty large number came to a sticky end.
Right. In his book of Terrorism in the State, Gianfranco Sanguinetti writes that once a terrorist group has been infiltrated and taken over by the secret services, it becomes, quote, nothing more than a defensive appendage of the state. You add that by 1974, most of the original leadership of the Red Brigades was imprisoned, and that subsequent leaders were quote, suspected of collusion with the secret services. How would you characterize the differences between the old original Red Brigades and the post-1974 group?
I think the question of the manipulation and infiltration of left-wing terrorism in Italy is very complex, and it is not has not by any means been clarified so far. But I do think it's true that the first generation of Red Brigades were nearly all unquestionably idealists who dedicated their lives to the armed struggle, and who in the early years carried out acts of violence that were mainly demonstrative.
I'm sorry, that were mainly, did you say demonstrative?
Mainly demonstrative, yes.
Right.
There was an escalation over time, and particularly with the new leaders after 1974. I think the first generation, there was an escalation with them too, but I think they were less bloodthirsty and less ready to take human lives than their successors. Clearly, in a conflict like that, there's an almost inevitable escalation in any case, that lives are lost on both sides. Both sides commit atrocities, and the hatred grows as the conflict moves forward. But the key question really is whether key figures in the leadership of the Red Brigades after 1974 might have been working for Italian secret services or the CIA, via Italian secret services, and that obviously has huge implications, and all of that comes to a head with the kidnapping of Aldo Moro, who was the mastermind behind the agreement for some form of power sharing with the Communist Party, known as the Historic Compromise, and who probably wanted Italy to move towards a situation where there could be a genuine democratic alternation eventually between the Christian Democrats and the Communist Party as the two major political forces in the country, but who possibly wasn't on the point of selling out to the extent that he may have perceived abroad. And I think one of the things that he's reported as having said, as the country was moving to a situation the Communist Party would give parliamentary support to a Christian Democrat-dominated government, but that they would actually support the government in Parliament, which they had never agreed to do before. It's said that he felt he needed to explain this to allied countries, that he was still in control, he wasn't opening the door to the communist enemy, and that it was a sort of recognition of force majeure, that they couldn't, the situation was such that they couldn't avoid this, but he needed to explain it to allied leaders, and effectively he never got he didn't have the time to do that. And there the question is whether the Red Brigades would want to kidnap and eliminate a political leader like Aldo Moro for their own genuine reasons, or whether ultimately Western and United States anxiety about what Moro was doing, what was the real reason why they kidnapped him and held him for 55 days and then executed him in cold blood at the end of that time.
The short version of what I'm going to ask you is: do you have any doubt that Mario Moretti was an agent of the state? The longer version involves things like the Hyperion Language School, where he made solo trips, which an Italian police report states the Hyperion is suspected of being the most important CIA office in Europe, and so on and so forth. Also, an interesting quote in this regard that you included by Gianfranco Sanguinetti, quote, "All secret terrorist groups are organized and run by a hierarchy which is kept secret even from their own members." What do you think about Moretti?
I think there are very good reasons to be suspicious of him. At the same time, there is the fact that he had spent many years in prison. There are suggestions that maybe his treatment in prison was somewhat privileged, and I'm not sure whether now he still returns to prison to sleep at night and is allowed out in the day to work. But one of the big questions really about these figures who are suspected of having worked for the CIA or Italian intelligence is how they accept to pay to pay for what they did with long prison sentences, and if they were working for the secret services, how after all these years it still hasn't emerged with clarity that was the case, that they haven't been convincingly denounced by their fellow Red Brigades members, and with plausible, convincing evidence to make that clear that that at the end of the day they were working for the other side. So it remains an open question, but clearly it is very important and significant because it completely changes the whole complexion of what happened. If,
right.
They may have been useful idiots who served the opposite, the interests of the opposite side, because they were naive and because they were sort of pushed in one direction or another. And obviously it's a completely different story if they were controlled and ordered, given their orders by the secret services, and particularly if those orders were to kidnap Aldo Moro and then to kill him. That it would be a tremendous, extraordinary reality if they had done that, secretly working for a Western intelligence organization.
Well, in that regard, this is interesting. You talk about how in the May 2nd, 1978 edition of Mino Pecorelli's rather hermetic magazine, Mino predicts that the first generation of the Red Brigades who were in prison would barter their silence in exchange for a general amnesty. He concludes, quote, "The Red Brigades acted on behalf of others, Italians or foreigners, Italians and foreigners." Was he correct regarding the reason for their silence, and was he prescient? How prescient was he in this prediction?
I think he was pretty prescient, actually, because although many of them did spend many years in prison, there was eventually a kind of political settlement, and most of them were let out. And in fact, one of the aspects where Italy, on the surface at least, comes out with considerable credit is how these people ultimately renounced the armed struggle, paid a certain penalty of years in prison, and then were released and reintegrated into society. And there has been a sort of reconciliation effort, which is ongoing even now, with meetings between relatives of the victims and certain members of the Red Brigades who were the perpetrators. I think in many cases representatives of the Catholic Church actually played an important role in this reconciliation, which it has been very significant in some ways, in that despite the fact that there's been very strong social tensions in Italy because of the economic crisis, and the fact that the Italian economy has not been growing for years, and there have been violent demonstrations social conflict, there's never been so far a return to the extreme conflict of terrorism. It's as though the country's been inoculated against that by the terrible experiences that they had during the last century. But it is it's one of these great puzzles as to what really did happen. On the other hand, of course, one can equally see that if these people had been working for the secret services, it's the kind of thing that they could never ever acknowledge publicly, and the fact that secrecy has effectively held for all these years could be underpinned by the fact that the lives would be at stake one way or the other if there was a public admission of what really happened, assuming it's true that some of these people were used by the intelligence organizations. The people who had betrayed their comrades, in theory, their lives could be directly at risk. And equally, the people who perhaps know that they betrayed but don't go public with that information know that their lives too, that would be a very dangerous allegation to make, and they might have to pay for it.
Of course.
With their lives. And I think it's interesting, as you mentioned, Mino Pecorelli, who was often very prescient and very well informed, and he paid for his excess of information and excess of candor with his life. He was shot dead in the street in Rome. So, and his death has remained substantially mysterious and with this sort of aura of mystery and sort of threat hanging around it. So that also is an element in why we perhaps don't know large chunks of the story, because those were dangerous times, and the danger hasn't entirely gone away, perhaps.
Absolutely. You say that Moro visited the United States in the role of foreign minister in 1974. His meeting with Henry Kissinger was described as traumatic. Moro's widow confirms that he was threatened while he was there. And again, Mino published several death threats against slightly veiled death threats against Moro. And on September 13th, 1975, Mino Pecorelli's magazine reported, it's just an incredible quote, an official visiting Rome with President Ford told us, "I see darkness. There's a Jacqueline in the future of your peninsula," referring to JFK's widow, Jacqueline Kennedy. What do you feel, if any, are the parallels between John Kennedy's and Aldo Moro's assassinations, specifically in terms of their mutual political outlook and the forces at work behind their murders?
Yes, I think that there is a strong parallel between the two cases, that they were two leaders who wanted to open dialogue with the left and change the way things had been done in the past. And Moro had, throughout his political career, had been involved in that kind of dialogue with the left, first with the Socialist Party, opening up to an alliance with them, which in the 1960s was seen as a very sinister development by members of the military establishment and the intelligence services and the far right, and so he was the object of hostility and threats, and even kidnap plots of the far right from way back because of his opening to the socialists, and then he went a step further in the 1970s when he was going so far as to open up a dialogue and some measure of power sharing with the Communist Party. Again, many conservative political forces seeing that as a step too far, and that is obviously paralleled by Kennedy's approach to global politics and neocolonialism and desire for a new and a more progressive future. And I think it is interesting that the sort of conspiratorial forces that were arrayed against them contained shared elements. And the books that I noticed you mentioned in your article by Michele Meta that describe the forces arrayed around organizations like the Centro Mondiale Commerciale and Paramindex, it involved all sorts of interests and forces that we know were involved in anti-communist activities and sometimes in violent and illegal activities such as P2, but figures who've been important in the fascist regime and people, all sorts of sort of conspiratorial threads run through these organizations and are brought together in them. And I think it's very interesting that Michele Meta's documents show that I think the first board meeting of the CMC took place in the offices near the Spanish Steps in Rome of a lawyer who was a member of P2.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the name you just mentioned. The member of P2?
The board meeting took place in a lawyer's office, and the lawyer was a member of P2, yes. So already that created a sort of symbiosis between those organizations. And Meta's documents also seem to indicate a presence of Israeli intelligence interests and possible connections to Mossad. I think it's very interesting that in the highly conspiratorial period after the Second World War in Italy, you had someone like James Jesus Angleton playing a very significant role, and he was somebody who in his career dealt with Italy and clearly Cold War requirements in post-war Italy. He also dealt with the Vatican, and he also dealt with Israel and had very close personal links to Mossad. And so he in himself tied together these various interests and forces and geographical areas. And he was also a hardline anti-communist who possibly eventually it's succumbed to a certain degree of paranoia. So the figures like him and the organizations that they came into contact with were the kind of instruments that, if you needed to do what happened, that they were ideally suited. And the question is, can we prove the connections and prove that subject A really did these things and he discussed what needed to be done in these particular fora where we know that these people had an opportunity to meet. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of information available now about the sort of conspiratorial fora where the decisions very likely were made and where they could have been made and where the kind of interests were represented that would want those kind of actions and outcomes. But we don't have as far as I'm aware anyway, the proof that
the data.
Yeah, that makes the connection and that proves the crime and the order and the order for it.
Right.
But I do think that those people like Angleton represented exactly the interests of the forces that were at work at that time, and it's very interesting that he brought together through his own personal contacts and friendships the people who could do the necessary and were in the necessary positions of power. So,
yeah, as you say, he's sort of a personification of all of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do think the other thing that I have thought for a long time is that the terrible things that occurred in Italy in the post-war era may have been the result of the people responsible for running the show having cut their teeth on the real war, where it was clear that anything went in order to win, that no holds barred. It was an absolute struggle for survival, and you couldn't be too prissy about what you did or how you did it. And that people with that experience and that mindset then ran the Cold War operations afterwards, and they probably felt that the conflict that they were engaged upon was similarly vital and a struggle for survival, and that again you couldn't be too particular about what you did and getting your hands dirty, and that mental conditioning coming from the warriors of the Second World War who became the warriors of the Cold War possibly explains why things that most people in a democratic society would never countenance, but these people, their history made them what they were, and dictated that they were prepared to do these things for what they thought was a super important cause.
The euphemism they love to employ is unorthodox.
Yes.
Well, another thing that struck me, I'm sure this is purely coincidental, but I just wanted to throw this out at you, is that it struck me the other day that it's strange that we have Licio Gelli's mattress company was called Permaflex, and then we have that very shadowy institution that Meta talks about in his book Permindex. Just wondering if that ever struck you as odd.
I never noticed that. It never occurred to me, I have to say. Yes, it's an interesting coincidence.
Also, talking about what you were just talking about with JFK and Moro, you include this absolutely fascinating chapter in your book, which is titled after him, Martin Woodrow Brown. And it seems like a lot of the information you got there was original sourcing from his, I believe, his nephew, and from the perhaps from the P2 Commission report. Anything you wanted to say about him, and what do you think he was really up to with that strange list of, that strange thing about Jimmy Breslin's book and the fact that his background is in cryptology? What do you think he was up to?
Yes, that's a very mysterious chapter of the story. I have to say that since I wrote the book, there haven't really been any significant developments to take it forward.
Where did you first hear about him? Because I can hardly find anything about him anywhere, except in your book.
I was working already as a journalist in Rome, and his death in Pisa was reported in the Italian press, and I think I wrote something for the paper I was working for at the time about it, and so that he came to my attention because of these newspaper reports in the Italian media, and then there was this curious the documents that were found on him, and the report that the police wrote about his death, discussing some of these documents and describing their report as riservatissimo and kind of highly confidential, apparently giving substance to the content of his documents by the degree of secrecy that they were imposing on it. I think that they have a certain amount more has emerged about how he was in contact with interesting and informed individuals. I think he was, as far as I remember, he possibly contacted a criminologist called Aldo Moro, who was a far-right sympathizer, and had I think he was a member of P2 and had very wide contacts in the secret services, but also in the sort of criminal milieu, and he was eventually killed and decapitated in Naples, and his body was dumped in a car near the home and base of Raffaele Cutolo, the Camorra boss. And it seems that there were suggestions that his death might have been connected to what he knew about the Bologna bombing, but the most recent suggestions that I've seen and that seem to be widely accepted now was that he possibly was he was a criminal psychologist, and he would examine criminals who wanted to be classified as insane, so they could be moved out of prison into some other kind of institution or get special treatment in prison. And the suggestion is that he was providing this kind of service to rival criminal groups, and that if you were working for one group, that wasn't acceptable for the other group. So that it was just as sort of as banal as that he tried to work all sides of the street, and he upset people in the course of doing that.
The result of inappropriate etiquette.
Yes. But I think Martin Woodrow Brown wrote to him, or may have met him and contacted him. I think he may have contacted another criminologist called Franco Ferracuti, who worked for the Italian Secret Service and also for the CIA. And he did also contact Raffaello Cutolo himself, who was this Camorra boss who claimed to have information about the Moro kidnapping, and has over the years talked to magistrates and provided a certain amount of information, what he claimed to know from his affiliates who were in Rome at the time of the kidnapping. But he I think was re-interviewed not so long ago by the latest parliamentary commission investigating the Moro affair, but his testimony didn't really take the story forward. But
you're saying Brown was re-interviewed?
No, because Brown died years ago. But Cutolo was re-interviewed. But Brown had some contact with Cutolo. I don't know if he wrote to him in prison, or he may have simply been crazy and was making contact with anybody whose name cropped up in this context.
Well, it seems clear that he had some mental health issues, and I spent some years working as an advocate for homeless schizophrenics, and so a lot of the ways he communicated were very reminiscent of schizophrenia. The writing all in the capital letters, and going really deep into this cryptology type of thinking. Yet at the same time, as you show, he knew things that he should not have known, and he knew people he should not have known. You say he was also picked up and questioned right after the assassination of JFK. And what I found fascinating was that he comes out and says the same people who killed Moro killed JFK. That's very fascinating,
Yes. No, it remains a fascinating enigma, but it's disappointing that, as far as I'm aware, nobody has really sort of taken it forward. I was always rather curious as well about the connection to Jimmy Breslin, and suggesting that he used one of his books as the source for a code. And Jimmy Breslin was somebody, is a name that didn't really mean anything to me. I think he's died some years ago, probably. But I think I did one stage even try to make contact with him and ask him, what he thought about this, or if he had any knowledge, and if there could have been any personal connection between him and Brown. But I think I'm not sure. I can't remember now whether I couldn't get hold of him, or he sort of dismissed it as a crank call.
Well, it's interesting that the book is about the Mafia. The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight is about the American Mafia. I believe it's a novel. It's an imagined story, right? But it's a story about the Mafia. So I thought that was interesting, that he selected this book to create some kind of code around. And you also say that a very important investigative journalist in Italy, who had all sorts of very classified information that he wanted to protect and put in a safe, also included the same list of racing car drivers that that Brown was using as code names for assassination attempts on people who would be assassinated, right? So there's something there, but we just don't know what it is. It's a hard nut to crack.
Yes, yes. As I say, I'm not aware that anyone has taken that forward or made any progress. But on that topic, I do remember that on one occasion when I interviewed Licio Gelli, I asked him about the list of
you did
racing drivers, and it was one of those sort of slightly sort of icy moments that there was a bit of a pause, and then I think I describe it in the book, a bit of a pause, and then he sort of comes up with a satisfactory, or apparently satisfactory answer to sort of dismiss it. But it was one of those ones where you felt that if there was something real behind this, it was quite a delicate thing to be putting to.
I think you've shown that Gelli's non-answers are often as important as his answers, if not more important. Yes.
Yes.
You say that Moro's former secretary, Sereno Friato, allegedly told the Moro Commission, quote, "Find the people behind the Pecorelli murder and you will find those behind that of Aldo Moro." I thought this was an interesting statement if one considers the fact that former Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti was initially convicted for the murder of Pecorelli in 2002, later overturned. What role do you think Andreotti played in Moro's death and in Operation Gladio? I know that's a hard question because he's such a foxy figure and covered his trails so well, but it seems like there's not enough about this incredibly important person that we know about in terms of all this. Yes?
Yes, I mean, I think he is a really crucial figure in all of this, and I think he really was America's man in Italy, and also the Vatican's man in Italy, and had a long career, and he was defense minister on numerous occasions, and prime minister as well. Prime minister when Moro was kidnapped, and we don't really know of anything that he personally did to try and save his party colleague. And as you mentioned, he was prosecuted for Pecorelli's murder, and first acquitted, then actually convicted on appeal, and then finally re-acquitted in the third stage of the justice system. So there was certainly strong reason to be suspicious of his role in relation to Pecorelli, and Pecorelli's death is often linked to what he may have known about the Moro kidnapping, and particularly if he had had access to the full document that Moro wrote while he was a prisoner. We now have an incomplete version of and where he launches a very bitter attack on Andreotti, and conceivably there was more, and that was even more damaging to Andreotti, and that is the part that has been subtracted and that has never emerged.
As you say, Andreotti really refused to do anything to help Aldo Moro when he was kidnapped, parallel to how the CIA refused to help in the search, which is just absolutely incredible. What do you think Mino's at the end of his life? What do you think Mino's real motivation was? Because earlier on, it seems like he's just working for blackmail purposes. You know, I won't publish this if you buy this painting, and get, you know, the money gets channeled through the painting sale. Um, but at the end, this former P2 member almost appears like an investigative journalist, and he's publishing these things that clearly put his life in danger. What do you think was going on in his mind towards the end? Was there any righteous indignation going on? Or am I being completely naive American in thinking that?
No, I think that probably is right. That he he really had the sort of journalism bug, and that was why he published these things that he shouldn't have published, and you know he was looking for scoops, and he preferred to publish them if he could. In fact, his reputation has been somewhat rehabilitated in more recent times. His sister is still alive and has devoted her life to campaigning for his rehabilitation. And I think one of the court cases concerning him, the judges actually say very respectful things about him, that you know that he did have this enthusiasm for investigative journalism, and he was a very good investigator, and obviously he had extraordinary sources, but that he did, you know, he had this natural desire to publish and be damned, and that you know that he deserves credit for that.
And you refer to his, you call it a hermetic, elusive style. You know, when I read these quotes by him, they almost strike me in part as a kind of like high literature, high avant-garde type of literature, because they're incredibly witty. And you know,
Yes.
and the word plays that he makes, like he calls, before Moro was killed, he calls Moro Monsieur Moro Bund, as in the word moribund. I mean, he loved wordplay, and you know, he was a talented writer in many ways, I think. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I think that's right. He was a very brilliant individual, and he was, it seems, very much a one-man show. There are other people who worked with him on the magazine, but they don't seem to have known what he was really up to, or necessarily who his sources were. And
well, you see, he had a lot of sources directly with secret services too.
That's right. Yes, yes. I think there was even a period when a Secret Service officer was working sort of directly in charge in the office. A man called Nicola Falde.
Well, what did you mean when you said that it's possible that he was threatened if he published certain things, and also threatened if he didn't publish certain things? Who was threatening him? Who was pushing him, forcing him to try to publish certain things there?
Well, I think that's something that he himself confided to his colleagues, and I think that it's quite likely that he found himself in the middle of one of these battles between Secret Service factions.
I see.
And you know, there was a faction who were loyal to Moro, and there's a faction who were loyal to Andreotti, and there were all sorts of issues over which the secret services could be divided.
Of course.
Israel or the Arab states or the PLO. So he had access to very delicate information, and this idea that if one faction wants something to come out, and they entrust it to him, that it could be on the understanding that if it doesn't come out, he'll be in very serious trouble. Whereas obviously the idea that the people who don't want something to come out are going to do something nasty to you is what is normal.
He put himself in a very precarious situation. He really did. I'm fascinated by your relationship with Licio Gelli. How many times did you meet with him in person?
I think I must have met him about 3 or 4 times.
How did you get him to warm up to you and to confide in you to the level that he did?
Well, it was interesting that over time you could see that he was becoming increasingly relaxed in talking about these topics that closer to the time would have been very sensitive, and he had been fairly sort of tight-lipped about a lot of stories, and then it became to some extent ancient history, and the direct protagonist might have been gone from the scene, and you could see that he gradually became more and more relaxed. I think also when he was older and living in his villa in the hills outside Arezzo, I think he enjoyed the attention of journalists coming to talk to him, maybe getting bored or lonely at that point. And I certainly noticed that if you went to talk to him with a television camera, he loved that, and he would keep talking, and he would be very much available. If it was just you with a tape recorder or something, it was less gratifying
very
to
interesting.
him. But definitely there was a period of thawing on his part, and eventually he could be fairly indiscreet, really.
You say that one of the P2 members claimed that Gelli reacted to Moro's murder by saying, quote, "We have finally resolved the Moro problem." What do you suspect Gelli's role was in Moro's kidnap and death?
Well, I think if it's true that the intelligence services had a high-level person infiltrated into the Red Brigades leadership, then Gelli might well have known that, and might have been running the show to some extent, because it seems that as the representative of American intelligence interests in Italy, he might have been in a position to give instructions to the leaders of the Italian secret services. So his organization would have been very much focused on what had happened, and that particular quote where he expresses he sort of assumes responsibility for what had happened, and sort of the main part's been done. Now let's see how it pans out. Is I think is very significant, and raises the questions to whether that operation was conducted on the orders of people like Gelli.
When he fled the country before the raid on his house, how much time passed between? Do we know when he fled? And then you say the Carabinieri show up at his house 9 o'clock in the morning. How much before that did he leave the country, and was he tipped off?
Yes, I think he'd left maybe a matter of weeks before, possibly tipped off, or possibly a lucky coincidence for him.
Do we know where he ended up in Latin America?
He had a strong presence in Uruguay. I think he also may have had some sort of a presence and possibly properties in Brazil as well, I think. But definitely Uruguay was a base for him, where he was protected and he was well in with the regime. And of course, he had historically very strong links to Argentina, to Peron, and to the anti-communist.
I believe he had a dual citizenship with Argentina, correct?
Yeah, well, yes, he was the economic attaché at their embassy in Rome, and he had very strong links there, links to Freemasonry in Argentina, and particularly he had a personal friendship with Emilio Macera, who was a member of P2 and was the head of the Navy there, which was the armed force that was one of the most heavily involved in torturing and killing dissidents in the dirty war in Argentina.
Well, that's quite a story, Philip. One last question. What do you think Ronald Stark's main task was when he was imprisoned in the same place with how convenient, the same place that the Red Brigades are sitting behind federal walls. Was his main task to teach them that Morse code that Gladio was already using, so that they could listen in? Was that the main reason he was there?
I'm not sure. I mean, that's another very mysterious part of the story. Stark himself, I think, is a fascinating character, and again, it's difficult to say whether he's a criminal interested in making money from drugs, who then has to cut a deal with state organizations and do things for them as well, or whether he was an intelligence operative who's very convincing and sort of deep cover, was as this drug manufacturer and dealer. And on top of that, also whether what his connections might have been to Israel as well, whether he went for Mossad on top of everything else. And yes, and whether his activities really made a difference in Italy, whether the intelligence that he gathered from talking to the Red Brigades leaders in prison was, whether those were significant contacts, and he then passed the information to back to the United States and also to Italian intelligence officers, and whether that influenced the outcome of what was happening, or as you say, if he could get them to adopt a code that could then be comfortably broken by Gladio or by the CIA, clearly that would be an important breakthrough.
And how's your book on Moro coming along? When do you think it'll be published?
I've been having a lot of difficulty with it. I started it some years ago, and I'd actually I wrote the first 4 chapters, and then I set it aside to do the updated Calvi Calvi
I see.
Calvi book, and I've been back on the research since, but because I also do freelance journalism, and I sort of switch back and forth between the two modes. Sometimes it's very difficult to sort of crank up the research, and I'm sort of constantly about to accelerate and do a sort of final tour of interviews, and finally sort of crack it, and then crack on with the writing. And I know it's constantly being postponed. But it is my main. But at the same time, I've always found it an absolutely fascinating puzzle. And there are interesting developments in relation to it, partly not all that much from the Parliamentary Commission, but there's a group of people who've formed an online group on Facebook who exchange information. It's called the Gruppo 16 Marzo, from the date that Moro was kidnapped. And some of them are very interesting, very well informed, and it's become a very interesting forum for exchanging information. But equally, it's something that can sort of, you could spend days just following the discussions and the latest things being published, and again risking information overload in a story that is already massive.
Is there any one thing you could share with us that you've learned since beginning the new research?
I think that one of the things to come out of the Parliamentary Commission's inquiry is the possible involvement in the case of a building in a street called Via Massimi in Rome, which was actually owned, curiously enough, by the IOR, and there was an extraordinary collection of people with a connection or actually living in this building, including suggesting that Marcinkus himself had an apartment. I think at one stage it was on a hill, and it was the sort of highest building overlooking Rome and not overlooked by any other building. And Marcinkus reportedly had an apartment there, and Cardinal Vagnozzi, who is an interesting character who'd been the Vatican's diplomatic representative in the United States, going back some time, but involved in sort of sensitive diplomatic activities in relation to the United States, and also somebody with, I think, Libyan intelligence contacts, and in particular, that there was an office of a company called Tumco, and the man behind it was, I think his name was John Tumpane, and they were involved in American military logistics, particularly in American servicing American air bases in Turkey, for example. So there's a sort of concentration of extraordinary characters in this building. It was almost sort of too good to be true from the point of view of a novel writer. And the suggestion is that, which seems to have been sort of bought and endorsed by the president of the commission, who wrote a book with an Italian journalist after the commission completed its work. And the suggestion is that Moro may have been held there in the early days of the kidnap, and that at the very least the cars used by the Red Brigades in the kidnap may have been concealed in the garage of this building. And in fact, interestingly, Mino Pecorelli has a cryptic reference to the complicit garage. He was promising further revelations about the complicit garage that was involved in the story. And if this does turn out to be true, it's an extraordinary development. Some people are still a bit skeptical about it, and it's still there's no real clarity on it. And to top everything else, the commission had its own investigators work on this particular topic, and then when they were concluding their work, they passed the information to the prosecutors in Rome to continue, which has the result that everything that they found out so far is covered by judicial secrecy.
Of course.
And they remained in that condition for for a number of years.
In perpetuity, no doubt.
Well, yes, and the feeling often is that the Rome magistrates know that their duty is to sort of bury the sensitive aspects of the story, and they work very efficiently to achieve that.
Well, we can end with the words of Vincenzo Vinciguerra, who said the state cannot investigate itself, right?
Indeed, yes. A very sensible view.
How do you?
Well, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. Could I ask a few questions?
Absolutely.
About yourself? I read
Absolutely.
your very interesting article on the website about Gladio. Are you originally from Britain, or?
I'm originally.
I'm not sure why I had that idea.
I'm originally from Gravesend, Brooklyn, which was a very mobbed up neighborhood, and I was among the only non-Italian families living there.
Right.
Yeah, and there was a big avenue near my Catholic elementary school, 86th Street. If you've ever seen Saturday Night Fever with John Travolta, the opening scene is he goes to this pizza store and puts the two pizzas together, and he's carrying the paint can. So that's 86th Street. That was a block, and we used to go to that pizza store every day for lunch. And what they don't tell you in that movie is every single store on that very long, miles long avenue paid protection money to Cosa Nostra. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know why you thought I was from Britain. I did spend 12 years living in Paris.
Right. Maybe I'd seen Gravesend and I'd associated that with Britain.
The original Gravesend. Yes.
Yeah.
I hope that you don't get too depressed by dealing with all this material. There's an enormous contrast between you obviously have a lot of joy of life, joie de vivre, as the French say, and this horribly dark, gloomy, pathological material, and I'm sure it must weigh on you at times. Yes.
Yes, it can. It can be gloomy.
Right.
Gloomy material to deal with. There's very rarely a ray of light. But obviously, it's interesting if you can make a difference in.
I believe so.
In getting to the truth, and also if the truth is as extraordinary as it might be.
Yeah. I like to say that one of the only things that people on our side have going for us is the truth, and publicizing the truth is just the absolute greatest fear of those in the power elite. But that's all we have is the ability to uncover the truth, I think.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, certainly it's nowadays with so much fake news and manipulation of the truth, and of course all the media to convey information, and also controversy over certain types of conspiracy theory that breach the accepted norms. It's a sort of a very complex world out there to try and get the truth out to, perhaps in a way that it's much easier to get things out, but to actually get clarity and
true.
persuade people what the truth is in a convincing way, with so much competition from so much else.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a sort of bedlam.
It's a bedlam. It's a bedlam.
It is.
Philip, thank you so much for your time. This was just such a great talk, and as soon as I transcribe everything, I'll send it to you for your approval. Anything you want to change will be fine, or add to, and then we'll get it up on the site. Okay.
Right.
And if I can help you with a review of the Moro book, I would really be great pleasure.
Right. I appreciate that, and I'll try and get it within a reasonable time frame.
Good books take a long time.
Yes. Yeah. No, this one has definitely had plenty of time to mature.
To just.
But in fact, one of the key things is deciding how to narrow it down and to break new ground in a useful way, at the same time as conveying the basic story to people who outside Italy don't know anything about it.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks again, Philip. You have a good evening.
Right. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.